Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Horace's Ode number 30, also called Exegi Monumentum, which the Loeb Classics edition translates as the Poet's Monument. So Horace was an interesting chap. I kind of, and maybe this is wrong, maybe the way that I think about him is wrong, because I'm not a Latin scholar, I'm not a Roman literature person, but I think of him as kind of like Shakespeare in that they both come from very humble backgrounds, or at least relatively humble in Shakespeare's case. Like his father was bourgeois, I guess is the right way of putting it. Like he was a successful glove maker, so they had some money, but they weren't wealthy, and they certainly were not aristocratic. So it was a working class background of sorts. Horace his father had been a slave, and he was freed, I think, before Horace was born. And so, it doesn't get much more working class than being the son of a freed slave. So Horace definitely comes from this very humble background. Probably neither of them had the most privileged education available in their day. Shakespeare definitely didn't. He had a grammar school education, which was basically sort of like lower level education, and then became largely self-taught. I think Horace Horace did actually have an education, but he certainly was not an aristocrat, and so he didn't have access to all of the knowledge, the upbringing, and the formal education that goes with that kind of social privilege. And yet both became arguably the greatest writers of their period, right? Shakespeare, I think there's very few people who would argue that anybody in early modern England was a better writer than Shakespeare, although some people probably were on a comparable level. People like Sir Philip Sidney, maybe Christopher Marlowe is in that mix. Ben Jonson might be a contender, depending on your tastes, whatever it is, right? But, and Horace is definitely in the top. I mean, he's probably not, I don't, again, this is my sense of it, not being a Latin literature scholar. He's probably, I would say, on a similar level to somebody like Virgil, although Virgil might be sort of the Shakespeare of first century BCE Rome. Again, I'm not 100% sure how they stood at the time in terms of reputation, how they stand today in terms of reputation, whatever it is. But Horace is definitely in the top ranking. And, I mean, Shakespeare became a favorite of Queen Elizabeth I, and his plays were performed before her, etc., etc. Horace was a favorite of the Roman leaders at the time. He became very, very successful and very famous in Roman courts. So there's this sort of like working class origins, but then through their dedication, drive, innate genius, creativity, whatever you want to call it, both Shakespeare and Horace sort of work themselves up to being some of the greatest writers of their periods, and indeed greatest writers in history, one would generally argue. So, Ode 30, Exegi Monumentum, it's a poem that utilizes a now fairly recognizable trope. I don't know that Horace was the first one to do this, probably was not, but certainly he articulates it extremely well, which is the idea of the poem as eternal monument for the poem as immortality for the poet. But he does this in some interesting ways. Because one of the things about Ode 30 is that there are bits of it that can be read as quite vain, quite quite conceited, right? Really quite arrogant. And then there's bits of it that undercut that. So I think it's an incredibly sophisticated poem in terms of how the poet persona presents himself as a writer. So I'll read you the first part of the poem. Basically, I'm gonna break this into 3 bits. There's sort of 3 stanzas in the Loeb Classics edition online, which is the version that I'm reading, the translation I'm reading. So there's sort of 3 stanzas here. I don't know that that's an accurate representation of Horace's meter. I've seen different versions of this through different websites that are broken up in different ways in terms of like line breaks and things like this. So I don't know. I don't read Latin. I don't have enough info to sort of go to an original and say, aha, this is the most correct scansion of this poem. So I'll read you these 3 bits because they kind of deal with 3 different movements through this idea. So the poem starts, I've finished a monument more lasting than bronze, more lofty than the regal structure of the pyramids, one which neither corroding rain nor the ungovernable north wind can ever destroy, nor the countless series of the years, nor the flight of time. So right into it. There is no introduction, no preparatory material. This is, I have done this amazing thing. I have created this immortal monument, right? This Exegi Monumentum, the poet's monument. And implicit, of course, in this is my writing is this monument. Through my writing, I have immortalized myself, essentially. I have made myself eternal. And this is actually the other reason that I think of Shakespeare with Ode 30, is because this is somewhat the one that I would immediately think of, the poem that I would immediately think of that expresses a similar sentiment is Sonnet 18 by Shakespeare, which is the Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer Day sonnet, right? Because the last 3 lines of this, or the last 4 lines of this, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade when in eternal lines to time thou growest, so long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee, right? One of his most famous sonnets. Now, the difference here, obviously, is that Horace is talking about a monument to himself, right? It is, I have made myself immortal, whereas the Shakespeare is talking about the beloved. The beloved is made immortal through this poem, but the fundamental gesture is the same. The poem gives eternal life. This is the mechanism through which immortality is to be attained. While it differs who it is that is made immortal through the gesture is fundamentally the same. It is about the power of poetry to preserve more effectively than stone, more effectively than bronze, more effectively than grand monuments or sculptures. Obviously, the other one, in that sense, that's directly connected to this would be Ozymandias by Percy Bysshe Shelley, which is about the decay of monuments to the great achievements of conquerors and despots and what have you, right? So this is sort of the central idea, right, of the poet's immortality ensured through poetry that is more eternal than the monuments of kings, the temples of gods, the constructed whatevers that are meant to preserve the legacies of the powerful. In the second portion, it gets a bit more interesting. There's more of this sort of self-aggrandizement. I have made myself immortal. I have, in a way, defeated death. I have become eternal. But it also moves beyond that, right? It's no longer just I am me. It is I represent the people that I come from. I represent who I am, my community, right? So in the second stanza in the Loeb translation, I shall not wholly die, and a large part of me will elude the goddess of death. I shall continue to grow fresh with the praise of posterity as long as the priest climbs the Capitol with the silent virgin. Right, so that's the first half of the second stanza. That's the I am immortal, I've made myself immortal by virtue of my towering poetic accomplishments. But then, I shall be spoken of where the violent Alphidus thunders and where Danash, short of water, ruled over a country people as one who, rising from a lowly state to a position of power, was the first to bring Aeolian verse to the tunes of Italy. So there's still the self-aggrandizement here. Horace does not go away from that, but what he adds to it is, I am representing the place that I come from. Alfredus was a river, I believe, if I'm remembering this correctly. So basically, he's saying, my immortality, my success, my glory is the glory of my people on behalf of the people who I come from. And this idea of bringing Aeolian verse to the tunes of Italy is again sort of representing his people, his heritage, his background. I have come from this place, this humble background, and I brought this Greek verse to the Latin language. Right? But then we have the relatively short third stanza. And here things really shift, right? There's a volta, which is in poetics is a turn. It's a shift of focus, usually at the end of a sonnet, although not necessarily a sonnet, right? Usually at the end of a poem. And so the turn or the volta is a change of focus. And so throughout the first portion of this, Horace has very much been, I have done this. I, right? I have finished. I shall not wholly die. I shall continue to grow. I shall be spoken of, etc., right? At the end, he shifts. And he puts himself into a larger poetic context within the worldview, the scope of Greco-Roman religion. So he says here at the end, take the pride, Melpomene, that you have so well earned, and if you would be so kind, surround my hair with Delphic Bay. So what does this mean? Well, Melpomene was the muse of tragedy, but sometimes the names of individual muses are used to sort of stand in for the muses as a collective, and based on the note in the Norton Anthology of World Literature, I think that's what's intended to happen here. So Melpomene stands in for the muses. This is an appeal to the muses, a very traditional approach to poetic attribution. So take the pride, Melpomene. You are the one who deserves the honor of this poem that you have earned so well. Again, that you are responsible for. This is your poem. You, the muses, have inspired me. I am not, right, this is the thing with Greco-Roman authorship, is it's not regarded in the way that we think of authorship today in the 21st century, of the sort of individual genius of the poet or the writer or whatever it is. It's thought of in terms of the muses have inspired this person. And if you would be so kind, surround my hair with Delphic Bay, right? The oracle at Delphi in the Greco-Roman world was the most famous of the oracles. The ability to speak prophetically and to speak prophetically in verse. So, I mean, at the end of this, Horace is shifting from what the bulk of the poem does, which is this poem or these poems are my glory. I am immortalized. I am monumentalized through this writing, to the muses have given me this ability to write poetically, and the glory, the truth of my writing skill belongs to them. So it's an interesting shift there at the end, right? Because if you just read the first couple of portions with everything being an I-driven statement, you would definitely think, yeah, this guy's a bit conceited, he's a bit vain. But we get that last little twist, and it complicates things really, really beautifully.